1. Why has the character of Shylock been interpreted in so many differing ways by so many different critics? Why is this dramatic character more puzzling or more stimulating than any other character in any of Shakespeare's other romantic comedies? The character of Shylock in The Merchant of Venice has been interpreted in so many differing ways because he is written with a complexity and ambiguity that challenges audiences and critics alike. Unlike many other characters in Shakespeare's romantic comedies, who tend to fall more clearly into archetypal roles like lovers, clowns, or villains, Shylock blurs the lines between villain and victim, stereotype and individual, and comic foil and tragic figure. Here's why Shylock is especially puzzling and stimulating. 1. Dual nature, villain or victim. Shylock is portrayed both as a moneylender demanding a pound of flesh, seemingly cruel and vengeful, and as a Jew persecuted by a Christian society that mocks, insults, and isolates him. This duality leads to sharply divergent interpretations. Some see him as a monstrous figure, embodying greed and vengeance. Others see him as a tragic figure, shaped and embittered by the relentless prejudice he faces. This contradiction creates a morally ambiguous character that doesn't easily resolve into one role, making him compelling and controversial. 2. Religious and racial tensions. Shylock is Jewish in a Christian-dominated Venice. His character taps into centuries-old anti-Semitic tropes, but Shakespeare also gives him one of the most powerful speeches in the play, "Hath not a Jew eyes?" humanizing him in a way that was groundbreaking for the time. This invites questions. Is Shakespeare reinforcing stereotypes or challenging them? Is Shylock's portrayal a critique of prejudice or an example of it? These tensions reflect broader social issues that continue to resonate, prompting continual re-examination. 3. Performance-dependent interpretation. How Shylock is acted on stage significantly shapes audience perception. He can be portrayed as a cold-hearted villain, a broken man lashing out after a lifetime of abuse, a comic caricature, or a deeply tragic figure. Few of Shakespeare's comedic characters carry this much emotional and thematic weight, and so theatrical choices, tone, delivery, costume, setting, have outsized influence on his meaning. 4. The play's tonal contradictions. The Merchant of Venice is classified as a romantic comedy, yet Shylock's storyline is anything but lighthearted. His forced conversion to Christianity, the loss of his daughter, and his defeat in court cast a shadow over the happy ending for the Christian characters. This dissonance makes critics and readers question whether the play is a comedy at all, or whether it contains the bones of a tragedy inside a comedy's frame. In summary, Shylock stimulates more diverse and impassioned interpretations than other romantic comedy characters because he is more layered, morally complex, and socially charged. His character opens up debates about justice, mercy, identity, and prejudice, themes that transcend the boundaries of comedy and remain relevant across centuries. The character of Shylock in The Merchant of Venice has been interpreted in vastly different ways because he is one of Shakespeare's most complex and morally ambiguous figures. Unlike many other characters in Shakespeare's romantic comedies who often fit neatly into roles like the witty heroine, the foolish suitor, or the benevolent ruler, Shylock resists easy categorization. Several factors contribute to his puzzling and stimulating nature. 1. Ambiguity in genre and tone. The Merchant of Venice straddles comedy and tragedy, and Shylock's role shifts depending on how one reads the play. In a traditional romantic comedy, the villain is usually a one-dimensional obstacle to love and harmony. Shylock, however, is given depth, humanity, and legitimate grievances, which complicates his role as an antagonist. 2. Historical and cultural context. Shylock is a Jewish moneylender in a deeply anti-Semitic Venetian society. Shakespeare's portrayal reflects both the prejudices of his time and a surprising degree of sympathy. Critics debate whether Shakespeare was reinforcing stereotypes or critiquing Christian hypocrisy. Modern interpretations, especially post-Holocaust, have grappled with whether Shylock is a victim, a villain, or both. 3. Psychological complexity. Shylock's famous speech, "Hath not a Jew eyes?" humanizes him in a way few other villains in Shakespeare's comedies are. His demand for a pound of Antonio's flesh is both horrifying and strangely justified by the abuse he has suffered. This makes him more morally ambiguous than, say, Malvolio, who is merely pompous and deluded. 4. Structural role versus emotional weight. Structurally, Shylock is the obstacle to the happy ending, yet his forced conversion and humiliation leave a bitter aftertaste, disrupting the comic resolution. Unlike other comic antagonists, Shylock's defeat feels punitive rather than restorative. 5. Performance and adaptation history. Actors have played Shylock as everything from a grotesque caricature to a tragic hero, shaping audience perceptions across centuries. The play's ending can feel unsettling, leading directors to either soften or emphasize its brutality. Why is Shylock more puzzling than other characters? Most of Shakespeare's romantic comedies resolve with clear moral and emotional closure. Lovers unite, fools are chastised, and harmony is restored. Shylock, however, lingers in the audience's mind because his suffering is not fully offset by the play's comic resolution. His humanity clashes with the cruelty of his punishment. The play does not provide a clear authorial judgment on him, leaving room for debate. In contrast, characters like Benedick or Rosalind are delightful, but ultimately straightforward. Shylock, however, forces audiences and critics to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, mercy, and bigotry, making him one of Shakespeare's most enduringly debated creations. 2. Many critics feel that the images of the sea in Act 1, Scene 1, strike the keynote of the play, that they suggest the Bond story as the central theme. Do you agree or disagree?
Why?
Yes, I agree that the sea imagery in Act 1, Scene 1 strikes the keynote of The Merchant of Venice and subtly anticipates the central theme of the Bond story. These images are not just decorative, they resonate with deeper thematic currents in the play: risk, uncertainty, value, and emotional exposure. Here's why the sea imagery is important. 1. Symbol of risk and uncertainty. In the opening scene, Antonio's friends speculate that his sadness stems from his ships being at sea, vulnerable to winds, waves, and pirates. The sea represents the unpredictable nature of fortune, a theme that mirrors the uncertain outcomes of the bond between Shylock and Antonio. Quote, "Your mind is tossing on the ocean." This metaphor links Antonio's internal emotional turmoil with the instability of his financial ventures, foreshadowing the dangerous gamble he takes by agreeing to Shylock's bond. 2. Foreshadowing the Bond story, the idea that wealth, and by extension, life itself, is at the mercy of uncontrollable external forces, connects directly to the Bond plot. Antonio's ships at sea become the collateral behind the pound of flesh. The sea's potential for loss makes the Bond credible and terrifying. If the ships sink, Antonio cannot repay the debt. If he cannot repay the debt, Shylock can legally claim his flesh. The sea is thus the backdrop and the mechanism that gives the Bond its dramatic power. 3. Emotional metaphor. The sea also echoes the emotional themes of love and friendship. Antonio's sadness is unexplained. His melancholy seems existential, as if he too is adrift, like his ships. His emotional vulnerability parallels his financial vulnerability, and both are exposed by the sea imagery. The sea becomes a metaphor not only for monetary risk but for human emotion and relationships, especially the bond of love between Antonio and Bassanio, and the dark bond with Shylock. 4. Theme of value. The discussion about the cargo-laden ships also reflects on how value is determined: monetary, emotional, or moral. This anticipates how characters will later debate the value of mercy versus justice and human life versus legal contracts. Conclusion. So yes, the sea imagery in Act 1, Scene 1, is more than atmospheric. It lays the thematic groundwork for the Bond story. It encapsulates the fragility of human enterprise, the unpredictability of fate, and the high-stakes nature of emotional and financial commitments. In this way, it serves as a symbolic overture to the entire play. I agree that the images of the sea in Act 1, Scene 1 strike the keynote of the play and suggest the Bond story as its central theme. Shakespeare uses these sea images not only to introduce us to the world of commerce and risk in Venice, but also to symbolically foreshadow the emotional and legal entanglements that drive the plot, particularly the dangerous bond between Antonio and Shylock. Why this sea imagery matters. 1. Risk and uncertainty as a central motif. The sea in this scene is depicted as vast, unpredictable, and full of peril. Salarino says he would be constantly anxious about his merchandise scattered across the ocean, worrying about storms, shallow waters, and dangerous rocks. I should be still plucking the grass to know where sits the wind. This mirrors the high-stakes gamble Antonio makes when he signs Shylock's bond. Like investing in ships, entering into this legal agreement is a venture fraught with uncertainty, and both involve placing one's fate in forces beyond control, the sea or the law. 2. Foreshadowing the bond plot. Antonio's ships, all bound to different ports, symbolize the fragility of fortune. His financial well-being is literally at sea, unsecured, and that precariousness becomes the foundation of Shylock's deadly bond. The sea imagery, then, introduces the audience to the idea that misfortune can come swiftly and unexpectedly, which is exactly what happens when Antonio's ships are reported lost. This foreshadowing builds suspense and sets the emotional and narrative stakes that will dominate the play. 3. Emotional undercurrent. The sea also acts as a metaphor for Antonio's unexplained sadness in the opening scene. His emotions are tossing on the ocean, just as his ships are, suggesting that inner emotional conflict, perhaps related to his deep affection for Bassanio, is as unstable and risky as his financial ventures. This emotional depth ties into the central theme of bonds, not only the legal contract with Shylock, but also the personal and emotional bonds of friendship, loyalty, and love. Conclusion. The sea images do more than set the scene. They establish the play's atmosphere of risk, loss, and fragile human enterprise. They link the outer world of commerce and legal contracts with the inner world of emotion and loyalty. By doing so, Shakespeare uses the sea to symbolically anticipate the core conflict of the play: what happens when a bond, whether financial or emotional, is tested under pressure. 3. What do the choice of caskets made by the Prince of Morocco and the Prince of Aragon show about their fitness to marry Portia? Explain. The casket test in The Merchant of Venice serves as a moral and intellectual trial to determine which suitor is truly worthy of marrying Portia. The choices made by the Prince of Morocco and the Prince of Aragon reveal their flaws, highlighting why they are unfit to be Portia's husband. 1. Prince of Morocco. Outward appearances and materialism. Morocco is drawn to gold because it symbolizes wealth, power, and desirability, qualities he values highly. His reasoning is superficial. Oh, a golden mind stoops not to shows of dross. He believes only the grandest, most luxurious choice could contain Portia's worth. Oh, he is a proud and martial figure, concerned with honor and external glory. Misjudgment of value. His choice reflects a failure to understand that true worth is internal, not material. The gold casket's message condemns his shallow thinking. Fitness for Portia. Portia, though wealthy, values wit, intelligence, and genuine virtue. Morocco's fixation on appearances makes him incompatible with her. 2. Prince of Aragon. Pride and self-importance. Aragon rejects the lead casket outright, calling it unworthy of his status. He chooses silver because he believes he deserves Portia. I will not jump with common spirits and rank me with the barbarous multitudes. He sees himself as superior to ordinary men. His arrogance blinds him to the humility required for true love. Misguided sense of merit. The silver casket's rebuke exposes his self-delusion. He is not as deserving as he thinks. Fitness for Portia. Portia dislikes arrogance. A man who assumes he deserves her, rather than proving his love through wisdom, is unfit. Contrast with Bassanio. Humility and true love. Bassanio, the successful suitor, chooses lead because he understands that love requires risk and selflessness, not calculation or pride. Portia's true match. Unlike Morocco and Aragon, Bassanio values substance over show, aligning with Portia's intelligence and depth. Conclusion. Morocco fails because he prioritizes appearances. Aragon fails because of his pride. Bassanio succeeds because he embraces sacrifice and humility. The casket test thus functions as a moral filter, eliminating suitors who lack the wisdom and selflessness needed to be Portia's true partner. The choices made by the Prince of Morocco and the Prince of Aragon in the casket test clearly reveal their unfitness to marry Portia, both in terms of character and values. Each suitor fails the test because he misinterprets the meaning of the inscriptions and reveals personal flaws, superficiality, arrogance, and entitlement that make them unworthy of Portia's love and the responsibilities of a wise husband. One Prince of Morocco chooses the gold casket. Morocco selects the gold casket, which bears the inscription, "Who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire." His reasoning shows that he is focused on appearances and outward value. He assumes that something as valuable as Portia must be represented by the most luxurious exterior, saying, "Who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire." He believes that gold, desired by many men, must be the right choice, which reflects his worldly mindset. However, this shows a shallow view of love and worth, a reliance on material wealth and status, an assumption that desire equals value. This superficiality makes him unfit to marry Portia, who is seeking a partner with deeper judgment and moral insight. 2. Prince of Aragon chooses the silver casket. Aragon chooses the silver casket inscribed, "Who chooseth me shall get as much as he deserves." He interprets this as a measure of his own worth, saying he deserves Portia because of his noble birth and self-image. His choice reflects arrogance. He believes he is more deserving than other suitors. Egoism. He is preoccupied with his own merit and pride. Entitlement. He expects to be rewarded based on social status. His failure reveals that he lacks the humility and emotional intelligence needed in a husband. He values prestige over love, making him, too, an unworthy match. What this shows about their fitness: both Morocco and Aragon fail to see beyond surface-level meanings and act out of pride, vanity, or self-interest. The true key to winning Portia lies in the lead casket, which symbolizes sacrifice, risk, and genuine love, a test of character, not wealth or status. Neither suitor possesses these qualities. Conclusion: the choices of Morocco and Aragon reveal that they are ill-suited to Portia because they lack the wisdom, humility, and depth that true love requires. Shakespeare uses their failures to reinforce one of the play's central themes: real value lies beneath the surface, and those who judge by appearances or self-importance are doomed to fail. 4. Relate Antonio's naturally melancholy disposition, which is emphasized in the opening scene, to his stoic acceptance of misfortune when he has to forfeit the bond. Antonio's melancholy disposition, introduced in the opening scene of The Merchant of Venice, serves as a foreshadowing of his later stoic acceptance of misfortune when he is forced to forfeit the bond. His unexplained sadness, "In sooth, I know not why I am so sad," suggests a man already emotionally detached or burdened by some inner weight, which may reflect a deeper resignation to suffering or fate. Connection between melancholy and stoicism. 1. Foreshadowing emotional resilience. Antonio's melancholy makes him seem accustomed to sorrow or misfortune. When the time comes for him to lose everything, his wealth, and possibly his life, he accepts it not with panic or anger, but with quiet dignity. This calmness in the face of disaster feels consistent with the emotional tone set in the first scene. The Duke cannot deny the course of law. "I am a tainted wether of the flock, meetest for death." Here, Antonio shows a stoic, almost fatalistic attitude, suggesting that he sees his suffering as inevitable or even deserved. 2. Self-sacrificial nature. His sadness may also reflect a deeper emotional self-sacrifice, especially in relation to Bassanio. Antonio's willingness to risk his life for Bassanio is an extension of his character introduced in Act 1. He seems less concerned with self-preservation and more concerned with loyalty and love, even at great cost to himself. 3. Acceptance of fate. Antonio never pleads for mercy himself. Instead, others intervene on his behalf. This passivity aligns with the philosophical ideals of Stoicism, where one meets life's trials with calm endurance. His early melancholy might reflect a worldview in which suffering is accepted as part of life. Conclusion: Antonio's melancholy is not just a mood, it sets the emotional groundwork for his later Stoic acceptance of misfortune. His sadness in the opening scene signals a character inclined toward emotional restraint, fatalism, and self-sacrifice, all of which define his noble, if tragic, reaction to the threat of death under Shylock's bond. Is Antonio a tragic hero? A tragic hero, in classical terms, is a noble character who possesses a fatal flaw, faces significant suffering, and evokes a sense of pity and fear in the audience. While The Merchant of Venice is a romantic comedy, Antonio's arc carries several elements of tragedy, and his stoicism adds depth to this interpretation. 1. Noble status and moral character. Antonio is a respected merchant, known for his generosity and loyalty, especially to Bassanio. His willingness to risk everything for a friend reflects a moral nobility and makes him admirable, if somewhat emotionally withdrawn. 2. Tragic flaw. Emotional repression and passive fatalism. Antonio's melancholy and self-sacrificing nature, while noble, also hint at a deeper emotional passivity or fatalism. His sadness at the beginning of the play is never explained. Some interpret it as unacknowledged romantic love for Bassanio, others as existential emptiness. His willingness to accept death without protest when the bond comes due could be seen as stoic bravery, but also as a kind of emotional surrender. He does not fight for his life. Instead, he quietly accepts his fate. I am a tainted wether of the flock, meetest for death. This line reflects self-devaluation, which could be his tragic flaw. He sees his own life as expendable. 3. Suffering and near-death experience. Antonio undergoes genuine suffering. His ships are lost, leaving him financially ruined. He is publicly humiliated and nearly killed by Shylock under the legal bond. He remains emotionally isolated even in the play's conclusion, as Bassanio returns to Portia. This suffering, endured with quiet dignity, earns audience sympathy and elevates his role beyond a mere side character. It suggests tragic depth. 4. Lack of a true comic resolution. Unlike other characters, Antonio does not receive a clear reward at the end of the play. Bassanio wins Portia, Gratiano marries Nerissa, and even Shylock is left with a form of justice. Antonio, meanwhile, ends the play still alone. His ships are saved, but his emotional state remains largely unresolved. This emotional isolation at the end of a romantic comedy is unusual and tragic. Conclusion: while The Merchant of Venice is not a tragedy, Antonio's character bears the marks of a tragic hero, noble, self-sacrificing, emotionally complex, and touched by deep suffering. His stoic acceptance of misfortune is central to this tragic reading. It shows both his strength and his flaw, his unwillingness to assert his own value or happiness, which ultimately leaves him spiritually adrift, even in the play's supposed happy ending. Antonio's melancholic disposition, established in the opening scene of The Merchant of Venice, deeply informs his stoic resignation when facing Shylock's bond and the threat of death. His melancholy is not just a passing mood, but a fundamental aspect of his character, shaping his reactions to adversity. 1. Melancholy as a defining trait. When Salarino and Solenio try to guess why Antonio is sad, he dismisses their suggestions and insists, "I hold the world but as the world, Gratiano, a stage where every man must play a part, and mine a sad one." This suggests his sadness is existential, not situational. He sees life itself as inherently sorrowful. His melancholy aligns with the Renaissance concept of the humors, where an excess of black bile led to a pensive, resigned temperament. 2. Stoic acceptance of misfortune. When Antonio's ships are lost and Shylock demands his pound of flesh, he does not rage or beg but instead accepts his fate calmly. "I am a tainted wether of the flock, meetest for death. The weakest kind of fruit drops earliest to the ground, and so let me." This reflects Stoic philosophy, which taught that one should endure suffering without complaint, accepting destiny with dignity. Even when Bassanio offers to sacrifice everything for him, Antonio insists, "Repent but you that you shall lose your friend, and he repents not that he pays your debt." His willingness to die for Bassanio reinforces his melancholic worldview. He sees himself as expendable. 3. Connection between melancholy and stoicism. Antonio's opening sadness foreshadows his later passive endurance of suffering. His melancholy is not weakness, but a preparedness for despair, making his acceptance of Shylock's bond inevitable. Unlike more hot-tempered characters, Antonio internalizes suffering, embodying the Stoic ideal of enduring pain without resistance. Why this matters? Dramatic irony. The audience senses from the start that Antonio is marked for sorrow, making his near-death experience feel fated. Contrast with Shylock. While Shylock fights furiously against his losses, Antonio yields, highlighting their opposing worldviews. Friendship with Bassanio. His melancholy makes his love for Bassanio self-sacrificial, deepening the emotional stakes of the Bond plot. Conclusion: Antonio's melancholy is not just a mood but a philosophical stance, one that makes his stoic acceptance of death consistent and tragically noble. His character shows how Shakespeare blends psychological depth with classical ideals, making Antonio one of the most quietly tragic figures in the play.
Five. The famous 18th-century writer Samuel Johnson refers in one of his essays to the improbability of the Merchant of Venice. What qualities of the play are the most improbable? Samuel Johnson's remark about the improbability of the Merchant of Venice refers to aspects of the plot, characters, and events that stretch believability, even by the standards of Elizabethan drama. While Shakespeare's plays often include fantastical or exaggerated elements, The Merchant of Venice includes several moments where the events or character decisions feel especially implausible or contrived. Most improbable qualities of the play. 1. The bond itself. Perhaps the most glaring improbability is the central bond between Shylock and Antonio, an agreement that allows Shylock to demand a pound of flesh from Antonio if the debt is unpaid. In reality, no legal system, even in Shakespeare's time, would recognize such a gruesome and literal contract. The idea that a sophisticated merchant and respected Venetian like Antonio would agree to such terms, even as a joke, strains credibility. This makes the entire court drama feel more symbolic than realistic. 2. Portia's courtroom disguises Portia's sudden transformation into a male legal expert who not only gains access to a courtroom, but outwits all the men present as charming, but highly improbable. The ease with which she disguises herself and is accepted as a learned doctor of law, without anyone recognizing her, stretches believability. The court's acceptance of her dramatic legal twist, that Shylock can take the flesh but not shed a drop of blood, is also legally dubious, even in a fictional context. 3. The loss and recovery of Antonio's ships. Antonio's entire crisis hinges on the reported loss of his ships, which leads to the forfeit of the bond. Yet immediately after his trial, he learns that all his ships are miraculously safe. The timing of this news, arriving just minutes after he's nearly killed, feels like a classic example of deus ex machina, a sudden and convenient resolution to a dire situation. 4. Jessica's sudden elopement. Jessica, Shylock's daughter, abruptly runs away with Lorenzo, stealing a fortune and converting to Christianity with little character development or inner conflict shown. The ease with which she abandons her religion, her home, and her father, while being warmly accepted by the Christian Venetians, feels oversimplified and idealized. 5. The casket test. The idea that Portia's hand in marriage is determined by a lottery involving gold, silver, and lead caskets is symbolic but fantastical. It serves as a moral test, but it's not a realistic way for a wealthy heiress to choose a husband. The suitor's agreement to these terms and their quick departure after choosing wrongly feels more like allegory or fairy tale than real behavior. Conclusion. while Shakespeare fills the play with poetic language, powerful themes, and complex characters. The structure of the plot relies heavily on improbable events, the bizarre bond, the courtroom twist, miraculous ship recoveries, and implausible disguises. These elements give the play a fairy tale quality, but also explain Samuel Johnson's skepticism about its realism. Samuel Johnson, in his preface to Shakespeare, critiqued The Merchant of Venice for its improbability, a common charge against many of Shakespeare's plays, which often prioritize dramatic effect over strict realism. Several elements of the play stretch believability, even within the conventions of Elizabethan romantic comedy. The most improbable qualities include 1. The casket test. A father's posthumous marriage lottery. Portia's father's will dictates that her suitors must choose among 3 caskets to win her hand. Improbability. A wealthy, intelligent heiress would almost never be subjected to such a random, high-stakes game of chance and reality. Dramatic function. It serves as a fairy tale device to test suitors' worthiness, but it defies real-world legal and social norms. 2. The pound of flesh bond. Shylock's contract with Antonio. The bond allowing Shylock to carve a pound of flesh from Antonio if he defaults is legally and physically implausible. Improbability. No Venetian court would enforce such a grotesque penalty. Even if permitted, extracting a pound of flesh without killing Antonio would be surgically impossible in that era. Dramatic function. It heightens tension and allegorizes the brutality of vengeance versus mercy. 3. Disguise and courtroom improbabilities. Portia's instant legal expertise. She disguises herself as a male lawyer and out-argues Shylock in court. Improbability. A noblewoman with no formal legal training could not convincingly impersonate a doctor of law in a high-stakes trial. The Duke and court officials fail to recognize her. Dramatic function. Allows Portia to showcase her intelligence and resolve the plot ingeniously. 4. The coincidental shipwrecks and last-minute wealth. Antonio's lost ships. All of Antonio's merchant ships are reported lost, threatening his life, yet miraculously, they arrive safely just after the trial. Improbability. The timing is absurdly convenient, undercutting the earlier tension. Dramatic function. Restores the comic ending, but feels unearned compared to the play's darker moments. 5. Racial and religious tensions oversimplified. Shylock's forced conversion. The play resolves anti-Semitism by having Shylock forcibly convert to Christianity. Improbability. Such a conversion would not erase lifelong cultural identity or systemic prejudice. Dramatic function. A punitive happy ending for Christians, but psychologically and socially unrealistic. Why Shakespeare embraced improbability. Theatricality over realism. Like The Winter's Tale, Merchant prioritizes symbolism, moral lessons, and emotional impact over plausibility. Fairy tale logic. The play blends comedy, romance, and legal thriller, requiring suspension of disbelief. Johnson's critique. While Johnson admired Shakespeare's genius, he argued that such improbabilities weakened the play's moral and intellectual weight. Conclusion. The most improbable elements, the casket test, the flesh bond, Portia's disguise, and the shipwreck reversal, serve dramatic and thematic purposes rather than realism. Shakespeare's audience accepted these conventions, but modern critics note how they strain credibility. Yet, these very improbabilities make the play memorable, provocative, and theatrically powerful. 6. The 19th century poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge speaks of Shakespeare's representation of men in all ages and all times in this particular play. What are the universal or timeless elements in it? Samuel Taylor Coleridge's observation that Shakespeare represents men in all ages and all times is especially relevant to The Merchant of Venice, a play that, despite its setting in Renaissance Venice, explores universal human experiences that remain relatable across cultures and centuries. These timeless elements help explain the play's enduring relevance and emotional power. 1. Prejudice and intolerance. One of the most universal themes in the play is religious and cultural prejudice, most clearly seen in the treatment of Shylock as a Jew in a Christian society. Shylock is mocked, spat on, and excluded not because of his actions alone, but because of his identity. His desire for revenge stems from years of discrimination, making his story a compelling portrait of how bigotry dehumanizes both victim and perpetrator. This speaks to systemic intolerance that still exists in the modern world, whether religious, racial, or ethnic. 2. Justice versus mercy. The courtroom scene dramatizes the eternal tension between strict justice and compassionate mercy. Shylock demands the legal execution of the bond, justice. Portia, disguised as a lawyer, pleads, the quality of mercy is not strained. This dilemma remains deeply relevant in debates about law, punishment, forgiveness, and moral responsibility. It asks whether laws should always be applied rigidly, or whether human empathy must temper justice. 3. Love and loyalty. Themes of romantic love, friendship, and loyalty run throughout the play, especially in the relationship between Antonio and Bassanio, and in the various marriages that occur by the end. Antonio's self-sacrifice for Bassanio captures the depth of friendship and devotion that transcends time. Portia's cleverness and patience demonstrate the complexity of love, beyond just attraction. These emotional bonds are familiar to all societies and generations. 4. Greed versus generosity. Shylock and Antonio represent two conflicting views of wealth and values. Shylock is often seen as a symbol of economic self-interest, insisting on repayment and viewing money as power. Antonio, while a merchant, is generous, lending money without interest and helping his friend at great personal risk. This contrast raises timeless questions about the role of money in human relationships and whether financial systems serve justice or selfishness. 5. Identity and outsidership. Shylock's famous speech, "Hath not a Jew eyes," gives voice to the experience of being othered, excluded, and misunderstood. His plea for recognition of his shared humanity is something deeply universal. The theme of alienation resonates with anyone who has felt marginalized or reduced to a stereotype across all eras. Conclusion. The universal elements in The Merchant of Venice, prejudice, justice and mercy, love, loyalty, greed, and identity, demonstrate Shakespeare's deep understanding of the unchanging nature of human behavior. These themes transcend the play's time and place, which is why Coleridge rightly praised Shakespeare's ability to represent men in all ages and all times. Samuel Taylor Coleridge praised The Merchant of Venice for its universal and timeless qualities, its ability to reflect enduring human truths across cultures and eras. Despite its Renaissance Venetian setting, the play explores fundamental aspects of human nature, society, and morality that remain relevant today. The most timeless elements include 1. The nature of prejudice and otherness. Shylock as the outsider. His famous speech, "Hath not a Jew eyes," resonates universally as a plea for empathy against bigotry. Systemic discrimination. The play exposes how legal, economic, and social structures marginalize minorities. Modern parallels. Racism, anti-Semitism, and xenophobia persist, making Shylock's struggle tragically contemporary. 2. Justice versus mercy. Portia's speech on mercy. "Oh, the quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth, as the gentle rain from heaven." This debate between rigid law and compassion is eternal. Legal hypocrisy. The Christians demand mercy for Antonio, but deny it to Shylock, revealing the selective morality of power. Modern courts and ethics. Societies still grapple with punitive justice versus restorative justice. 3. Love, loyalty, and betrayal. Bassanio's dilemma. He borrows money to woo Portia, risking Antonio's life, a conflict between romantic love and friendship. Portia's test of loyalty. The playful but pointed trial of Bassanio's fidelity mirrors modern relationship insecurities. Universal theme. Trust and sacrifice in relationships are timeless concerns. 4. Greed versus generosity. Shylock's avarice versus Antonio's generosity. The play contrasts materialism with spiritual wealth. Casket test allegory. The lead casket's lesson speaks to selflessness as true value. Modern capitalism. The tension between wealth and ethics remains urgent today. 5. The mask of identity. Portia's disguise. Her transformation into Balthazar explores gender fluidity and societal expectations. Shylock's performance of identity. He must navigate between his Jewish heritage and Christian-dominated Venice. Universal relevance. People still code switch, hide identities, or perform roles to survive in hostile environments. 6. The ambiguity of happy endings. Comedy with a bitter aftertaste. The forced conversion of Shylock and Jessica's abandonment of her heritage complicate the festive conclusion. Modern parallel. Many resolutions in life come at a moral cost. Justice is rarely perfect. Why Coleridge was right. Shakespeare's genius lies in crafting archetypal conflicts that transcend time. The oppressed versus the powerful. The letter of the law versus the spirit of mercy. Love tested by material and moral challenges. The performative nature of identity. These elements ensure that The Merchant of Venice remains not just a Renaissance play, but a mirror for every age, one that reflects humanity's best and worst instincts across centuries. 7. Compare the argument about usury, the talk about friendship, and the plea for mercy from the standpoint of dramatic intensity. Which one of these subjects, in your view, is the most important issue in this play? From a standpoint of dramatic intensity, the three moments you mention, the argument about usury, the talk about friendship, and the plea for mercy, Act 4 Scene I, each reveal crucial emotional and thematic peaks in The Merchant of Venice, but they serve different functions within the play's structure and moral landscape. Among them, the plea for mercy in Act 4 Scene I stands out as the most important and thematically central issue of the play. 1. Usury, philosophical and tense in this scene. Antonio and Shylock debate usury, the practice of charging interest on loans. The argument is philosophical and personal. Shylock defends his right to profit from lending, pointing out the hypocrisy of Antonio's disdain for interest. Antonio responds with moral superiority, refusing to treat Shylock with respect despite needing his money. This scene introduces the central conflict of the play, between Christian and Jew, between mercy and revenge, and between different worldviews, but it is more intellectually tense than emotionally intense. 2. Friendship, emotional and intimate. This scene features Bassanio's successful choice of the lead casket and his declaration of love for Portia. At the same time, he receives news of Antonio's danger, and his friendship is put to the test. The scene shows Bassanio's internal conflict between romantic love and loyalty to Antonio. Portia's response, offering herself and her wealth to help Antonio, also shows the expanding web of human connection and sacrifice. This moment is deeply emotional, showing the nobility of friendship and love, but it lacks the moral gravity and public consequences of the courtroom scene. 3. Mercy morally and dramatically central. Portia's famous plea for mercy in the courtroom scene is the emotional and ethical climax of the play. Disguised as a lawyer, she implores Shylock to show compassion rather than seek legal revenge. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven. This speech elevates the drama to a moral confrontation between justice and humanity. Tests the character's values in a public and life-or-death setting. Forces the audience to reflect on what true justice and mercy look like, especially when laws are harsh or when personal vengeance threatens to override compassion. The tension, the stakes, and the universal message of the speech make it the most dramatically intense and thematically vital moment in the play. Conclusion. While the argument about usury sets the ideological conflict in motion, and the talk about friendship reveals deep emotional loyalty, it is the plea for mercy that becomes the moral fulcrum of The Merchant of Venice. It addresses universal human values, delivers the most powerful speech, and determines the fate of the central conflict. Therefore, mercy is the most important issue in the play, because it ultimately defines what kind of world Shakespeare is imagining. One ruled by compassion or by law and vengeance. The three key scenes you mentioned, usury, friendship, and mercy, each escalate in dramatic intensity while reflecting the play's central moral and philosophical conflicts. While all are vital, mercy emerges as the most critical issue because it synthesizes the play's deepest tensions: justice versus compassion, revenge versus forgiveness, and the hypocrisy of power. 1. Usury, economic and moral tension, dramatic intensity. Moderate, but foundational. Shylock and Antonio's debate over interest sets up their ideological clash. Shylock frames usury as shrewd business, citing biblical precedent. Antonio condemns it as unnatural, yet his own wealth relies on risky maritime trade. The bond's grotesque terms inject ominous foreshadowing, but the scene remains a negotiation, not yet a crisis. Significance introduces greed, hypocrisy, and dehumanization, yet the stakes are still abstract. 2. Friendship, emotional and ethical crisis, dramatic intensity. High, with personal stakes. Bassanio's successful casket choice is undercut by Antonio's letter revealing Shylock's deadly claim. Bassanio's anguish tests romantic love versus male friendship. Portia's reaction shifts her from heiress to active savior, foreshadowing her courtroom role. Significance raises loyalty, sacrifice, and moral prioritization, but the real explosion of tension awaits the trial. 3. Mercy, the climax of moral reckoning, dramatic intensity. Peak, with life and death consequences. Shylock's demand for vengeance, my deeds upon my head. I crave the law, clashes with Portia's transcendent mercy speech. The turning point. Portia's legalistic trap exposes the brutality of literal justice, mirroring Shylock's own rigid logic. Hypocrisy laid bare, the Christians, who preach mercy, enforce a punitive resolution. Significance. This scene condemns vengeance, critiques systemic bias, and questions whether true mercy exists in a flawed world. Why mercy is the most important issue, while usury frames the economic conflict and friendship personalizes it. Mercy is the play's moral and philosophical core. 1. Universal resonance. The plea for mercy transcends Venice. It's a timeless human dilemma. 2. Structural pivot. The trial scene resolves the plot while leaving uncomfortable questions. Was Shylock shown mercy, or just outmaneuvered? 3. Shakespeare's irony. The Christians' failure to practice what they preach makes mercy the play's most provocative and unresolved theme. Conclusion. The usury debate and friendship crisis are crucial, but mercy, or the lack thereof, is what lingers, forcing audiences to grapple with whether society can ever truly reconcile justice with compassion. This ambiguity is why The Merchant of Venice endures as more than a comedy or a tragedy, but a searing exploration of human frailty. If we argue that usury is the most important issue in The Merchant of Venice, we center the play as a socio-economic critique, one that exposes hypocrisy, dehumanization, and the brutal logic of capitalism. Here's how this interpretation unfolds. Why usury is the core issue. 1. The root of all conflicts, the pound of flesh bond, stems from Antonio's hatred of usury and Shylock's insistence on its legitimacy. Without the debt, there is no trial, no mercy debate, and no forced conversion. Usury sets the entire plot in motion. 2. Hypocrisy of Christian Venice. Antonio condemns usury as unnatural, yet his wealth comes from high-risk maritime trade, another form of exploitative profit. The Christians use moral rhetoric against Shylock, while relying on the same mercantile systems they vilify. 3. Shylock's humanity versus stereotype. Shylock's defense of usury frames it as survival in a hostile world, not mere greed. His famous "hath not a Jew eyes" speech ties his rage directly to economic oppression. You take my life when you do take the means whereby I live. For money as a corrosive force, Bassanio seeks Portia for love, but only through borrowed wealth. Portia's wealth is the reason she's trapped by the casket test. Her father commodifies her marriage. Even the happy ending depends on Shylock's confiscated riches, funding Lorenzo and Jessica's future. Dramatic versus thematic weight. Usury lacks the climactic intensity of the trial scene, but it's the invisible engine of the play's violence. Unlike mercy or friendship, usury is the material reality that distorts both. Timeless relevance. Then, Venice was a global financial hub. Usury laws reflected religious tensions. Now, the play mirrors modern critiques of predatory lending, wealth inequality, and systemic bias. Counterargument. Does usury alone explain the play? Mercy and friendship are more emotionally charged, but they stem from the economic conflict. Shylock's fate isn't just about religion. It's about who controls money and power. Conclusion: if we prioritize usury, the Merchant of Venice becomes a savage indictment of capitalism's dehumanizing effects. The Christian's victory isn't moral. It's economic domination masked as divine justice. This reading makes the play less about individual ethics and more about systems that turn people into commodities. Final verdict: usury is the foundational issue, but its power lies in how it warps everything else, making it the play's hidden heart. If we argue that usury is the most important issue in The Merchant of Venice, we center the play as a socio-economic critique, one that exposes hypocrisy, dehumanization, and the brutal logic of capitalism. Here's how this interpretation unfolds. Why usury is the core issue. 1. The root of all conflicts. The pound of flesh bond stems from Antonio's hatred of usury and Shylock's insistence on its legitimacy. Without the debt, there is no trial, no mercy debate, and no forced conversion. Usury sets the entire plot in motion. 2. Hypocrisy of Christian Venice. Antonio condemns usury as unnatural, yet his wealth comes from high-risk maritime trade, another form of exploitative profit. The Christians use moral rhetoric against Shylock, while relying on the same mercantile systems they vilify. 3. Shylock's humanity versus stereotype. Shylock's defense of usury frames it as survival in a hostile world, not mere greed. His famous "hath not a Jew eyes" speech ties his rage directly to economic oppression. You take my life when you do take the means whereby I live. For money as a corrosive force, Bassanio seeks Portia for love, but only through borrowed wealth. Portia's wealth is the reason she's trapped by the casket test. Her father commodifies her marriage. Even the happy ending depends on Shylock's confiscated riches funding Lorenzo and Jessica's future. Dramatic versus thematic weight. Usury lacks the climactic intensity of the trial scene, but it's the invisible engine of the play's violence. Unlike mercy or friendship, usury is the material reality that distorts both. Timeless relevance. Then, Venice was a global financial hub. Usury laws reflected religious tensions. Now, the play mirrors modern critiques of predatory lending, wealth inequality, and systemic bias. Counter-argument. Does usury alone explain the play? Mercy and friendship are more emotionally charged, but they stem from the economic conflict. Shylock's fate isn't just about religion. It's about who controls money and power. Conclusion: if we prioritize usury, The Merchant of Venice becomes a savage indictment of capitalism's dehumanizing effects. The Christian's victory isn't moral. It's economic domination masked as divine justice. This reading makes the play less about individual ethics and more about systems that turn people into commodities. Final verdict: usury is the foundational issue, but its power lies in how it warps everything else, making it the play's hidden heart. If we choose friendship as the most important issue in The Merchant of Venice, while The Merchant of Venice is often debated for its themes of mercy, justice, and usury, the bond of friendship, particularly between Antonio and Bassanio, drives the plot, shapes character motivations, and ultimately tests moral boundaries. If we argue that friendship is the central issue, the play transforms into a tragedy of loyalty, sacrifice, and betrayal, revealing deeper tensions than its comic surface suggests. Why friendship is the core issue. 1. The catalyst for the plot. The entire story begins with Bassanio's request for money to woo Portia. Antonio, despite his melancholy, risks everything for him. My purse, my person, my extremist means lie all unlocked to your occasions. This selfless loan forces Antonio into Shylock's deadly bond, setting the central conflict in motion. 2. The ultimate test, life versus love. In 3.2, when Bassanio receives Antonio's letter, he must choose between his new wife and his best friend. Portia's reaction tests whether romantic love can coexist with male friendship. The ring subplot becomes a metaphor for broken vows, both marital and fraternal. 3. The dark side of friendship, exploitation and codependence. Antonio's love for Bassanio borders on obsessive devotion, raising questions. Is this friendship genuine, or does Antonio use it to fill his existential loneliness? Does Bassanio take advantage of Antonio's generosity? Unlike the clear-cut villainy of Shylock or the idealism of Portia, Antonio and Bassanio's bond is unsettlingly ambiguous, making it more dramatically complex than the usury or mercy debates. 4. Friendship versus other bonds. Shylock's broken relationship with Jessica contrasts with Antonio and Bassanio's bond. Portia's loyalty to her father's will parallels Antonio's loyalty to Bassanio. Both are rigid, sacrificial, and potentially destructive. Dramatic intensity. How friendship outshines mercy and usury theme. Dramatic peak. Why friendship is stronger. Usury. Shylock's bond, economic but impersonal, lacks emotional stakes. Mercy. Portia's speech, abstract ideal, undercut by the Christian's hypocrisy. Friendship. Bassanio's choice, raw, personal, morally ambiguous, forces characters to confront love, guilt, and betrayal. The trial scene is theatrically powerful, but the friendship crisis lingers psychologically. Antonio's silent, unresolved melancholy in the final act suggests his sacrifice wasn't truly redeemed, making friendship the unsettled heart of the play. Timeless relevance. Why friendship matters most. Then, Renaissance Europe idealized male friendship, but the play exposes its costs. Now, modern audiences grapple with toxic loyalty, emotional debt, and codependency. Antonio and Bassanio's bond feels eerily contemporary. Counterarguments. Is friendship really the main issue? Mercy has grander moral weight. Usury drives the plot's mechanics, but friendship humanizes these themes. Without Antonio's love for Bassanio, the bond is just a financial dispute. Without Bassanio's guilt, the trial lacks emotional stakes. Conclusion. Friendship as the hidden tragedy. If we center friendship, The Merchant of Venice becomes a dark exploration of love's limits. Antonio's final silence, while others celebrate, hints that true friendship is incompatible with the play's comic ending. Unlike mercy or usury, friendship is intimate, flawed, and heartbreaking, making it the play's most enduring and unsettling theme. Final verdict. Friendship is the secret engine of the play, less discussed than mercy or usury, but more emotionally devastating in its implications.
8. Many critics think that The Merchant of Venice is more tragic than comic. Why do you think so? Or do you disagree? Why? The question of whether The Merchant of Venice is more tragic than comic is a subject of much debate among critics and audiences. While the play contains elements of both comedy and tragedy, I would argue that the play leans more toward tragedy than comedy, primarily due to its moral ambiguity, dark themes, and the suffering experienced by key characters, particularly Shylock and Antonio. 1. The tragic elements in the play. The most compelling argument for The Merchant of Venice being more tragic than comic lies in the tragic fate of Shylock. Although Shylock is not an entirely sympathetic character, his downfall is both deeply unjust and sorrowful. Shylock enters the play seeking justice and revenge against Antonio, but by the end, he loses everything: his wealth, his dignity, and his faith. He is forced to convert to Christianity, which marks the ultimate humiliation and destruction of his identity. The pound of flesh, which I demand of him, is dearly bought. 'Tis mine and I will have it. Shylock's destruction is not only legal but personal and cultural, as he is denied his religious identity and forced to give up his livelihood. This punishment is harsh, even for a character who is sometimes seen as antagonistic. Shylock's fate reflects the tragic consequences of a character who is unable to escape his desire for revenge, and it parallels the tragic elements of Greek drama where characters are punished by the gods for flaws such as hubris or excessive pride. His destruction is not just the result of his own actions, but also of the societal forces that drive him to seek vengeance, making his story one of tragic victimization. 2. Antonio's suffering and melancholy. Another tragic element is Antonio's own suffering. Antonio begins the play with a deep sense of melancholy, which remains unresolved throughout the story. He feels unfulfilled despite his wealth and good standing in society, and his devotion to Bassanio is so intense that he is willing to risk his life for him. When Antonio agrees to the bond with Shylock, he does so out of loyalty to Bassanio, not fully considering the dangerous terms of the agreement. This decision highlights Antonio's tragic flaw. His self-sacrifice and unquestioning loyalty lead him to make a dangerous choice. My purse, my person, my extremist means lie all unlocked to your occasions. When he faces the prospect of losing his life, Antonio seems resigned to his fate, presenting a vision of a man who is disconnected from joy and accepting of death. This stoic acceptance of misfortune is tragic in its own right, as it reveals Antonio's inability to find any deeper meaning in his life beyond his relationship with Bassanio. 3. The Final Judgment, a question of justice. The final courtroom scene, in which Portia pleads for mercy and Shylock is defeated, further emphasizes the tragic nature of the play. The outcome, while technically just, is morally troubling. Shylock is denied his pound of flesh, but the legal and personal consequences he faces are devastating. The fact that his punishment involves forced conversion and the loss of his wealth paints the resolution as less of a comic triumph than a tragic fall. The pound of flesh, which I demand of him, is dearly bought. 'Tis mine and I will have it. Shylock's humiliation and destruction overshadow the more light-hearted resolution between Bassanio and Portia. The comic conclusion for the lovers seems disjointed from the grim fate of Shylock, leaving a lingering sense of unease rather than pure satisfaction. 4. The comic elements and their ambiguity. Although the play contains several comic elements, such as the disguises, the mistaken identities, and the eventual happy marriages of Bassanio and Gratiano, these lighter moments seem more superficial compared to the moral and emotional complexity of the tragedy at the heart of the play. The plot lines involving the caskets and disguises seem to offer a lighter escape from the more serious themes of the play, but they do not resolve the underlying social and moral tensions that have been explored. The marriages at the end might seem like a happy conclusion, but they feel tonally disconnected from the unresolved moral questions and the devastation of Shylock. The play ends on a tragic note because justice is not served evenly. Shylock's punishment for his attempt at revenge is disproportionately harsh, and his fate does not feel like a true comic resolution. Conclusion. The play's tragic nature. While The Merchant of Venice does contain comic elements such as the disguises and the romantic resolutions, the tragic undertones of the play are far more prominent. The fate of Shylock, the suffering of Antonio, and the moral complexity of the final judgment all suggest that the play is more in line with tragic drama than a traditional comedy. The conflict between justice and mercy, and the suffering of key characters, all contribute to the view that the play is a tragicomedy or even more tragic than comedic, as it is ultimately a moral exploration of themes like revenge, loss, and the complexities of human behavior. Is The Merchant of Venice more tragic than comic? Shakespeare's play straddles the line between comedy and tragedy, but many critics argue it leans more tragic due to its unresolved suffering, systemic cruelty, and emotional devastation. Here's why, and why some might disagree. Arguments for tragedy. 1. Shylock's fate, a broken man. Forced conversion and ruin. The trial ends with Shylock stripped of his wealth, faith, and dignity. No real comic resolution for him. I am content. A line of chilling resignation, not joy. No redemption. Unlike Malvolio, Shylock exits the play without reconciliation. His final humiliation lingers. 2. The Christian's hypocrisy undercuts comedy. Mercy speech equals hollow. Portia's beautiful words on mercy are followed by punitive sentencing, exposing Christian hypocrisy. Bassanio's betrayal. He swears loyalty to Antonio but abandons him for Portia, then gives away her ring, a dark irony. 3. Jessica's ambiguous ending. She escapes Shylock but loots him, trades her mother's ring for a monkey, and seems adrift in Christian society. Her marriage to Lorenzo feels rushed, lacking the emotional payoff of true comic unions. 4. Antonio's unresolved melancholy. The play begins and ends with Antonio alone and sad. Even after surviving Shylock's bond, he gains nothing. Bassanio marries Portia, leaving him behind. I am a tainted wether of the flock, meetest for death. Arguments for comedy. 1. Structural conventions. Marriage and harmony. The ending features 3 weddings, a classic comic resolution. Disguise and wit. Portia's courtroom trickery and the ring farce are pure Shakespearean comedy. 2. Shylock as a comic villain. In Elizabethan times, Shylock's defeat might have been laughable, a caricatured Jew getting his comeuppance. His exaggerated rage aligns with stock comic antagonists. 3. Belmont's fairytale escape. The final act shifts to moonlit Belmont, where love and music dominate, a tonal escape from Venice's brutality. Middle ground, a problem play. Many classify Merchant as a problem play, neither fully comic nor tragic, but unsettlingly in between. Comic shell, tragic core, the weddings and wit paper over the play's cruelty. Audience discomfort. Modern viewers laugh less at Shylock's suffering, making the play feel darker. Final verdict. More tragic than comic. While the play follows comic structure, its emotional weight tilts toward tragedy. Shylock's destruction is too brutal for comedy. Antonio's loneliness undermines the happy ending. Jessica's assimilation feels uneasy, not joyous. The Christian's victory rings hollow, leaving a bitter aftertaste, proof that Shakespeare, even in comedy, couldn't ignore the cost of cruelty. Do you agree? Yes, if you focus on Shylock, Antonio, and systemic injustice. No, if you prioritize the marriages and wit. But the debate itself proves the play's enduring complexity. 9. Justify Shylock's demand for revenge against Antonio. Shylock's demand for revenge against Antonio, though extreme, can be justified within the context of his personal suffering, social position, and the deep injustices he has endured. Shakespeare presents Shylock not just as a villain, but as a man driven to vengeance by years of abuse, discrimination, and personal loss. His desire for revenge is the result of both systemic persecution and personal grievances, making it emotionally and psychologically understandable, even if morally questionable. 1. Long-standing abuse by Antonio. Antonio has repeatedly insulted and humiliated Shylock in public. He spits on him, calls him a dog, and mocks his livelihood as a moneylender. Despite needing a loan from Shylock, Antonio shows him no respect, refusing to apologize or treat him as an equal. This treatment is not just rudeness, it reflects deep-seated religious and economic prejudice. For Shylock, the bond becomes a rare chance to gain power over someone who has always held power over him. You call me misbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spit upon my Jewish gabardine. 2. Social and religious persecution. Shylock is a Jew in a hostile Christian society, and the play portrays him as a figure of systemic marginalization. He is barred from many professions and confined to moneylending. He is viewed with suspicion and hatred by most Venetians. His desire for revenge reflects not only his personal pain but the cumulative frustration of living as an outsider, constantly denied dignity and justice. Hath not a Jew eyes? If you prick us, do we not bleed? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? This powerful speech shows that Shylock sees revenge as a form of equality, an attempt to claim the same rights and instincts that Christians exercise without question. 3. Betrayal by his daughter. Shylock's daughter, Jessica, runs away with a Christian, steals his money, and converts. This betrayal compounds his grief and humiliation, further fueling his rage and sense of powerlessness. He feels violated not only as a father but as a Jew, watching his heritage be discarded. His fixation on revenge against Antonio may be a way of reasserting control in a world where everything, his family, his dignity, his identity, is under attack. 4. Desire for justice in a biased society. In a society where the legal and moral system is stacked against him, Shylock sees the bond as a form of justice, a contract freely entered by Antonio. While the punishment is grotesque, the legal basis is technically sound, and Shylock sees this as his only chance to assert justice on his own terms. Conclusion. Shylock's demand for revenge can be justified as a natural human response to dehumanization, betrayal, and systemic injustice. His actions, though harsh, are rooted in pain, not pure malice, and Shakespeare gives him the depth of a man who seeks revenge not simply out of hatred, but as a means of restoring his wounded dignity. The tragedy lies in how revenge consumes him, but the desire itself is deeply understandable. Justifying Shylock's demand for revenge against Antonio. Shylock's insistence on extracting a pound of Antonio's flesh is often seen as monstrous, but a closer reading reveals that his demand for revenge is psychologically, morally, and socially justified within the play's world. Here's why. 1. Antonio's relentless abuse. Public humiliation. Antonio has repeatedly spat on, insulted, and mocked Shylock for being a Jew. You call me misbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spit upon my Jewish gabardine. Economic sabotage. Antonio undercuts Shylock's business by lending money interest-free, harming his livelihood. Dehumanization. Shylock is treated as a subhuman parasite, not a fellow Venetian. Revenge is a natural response to systemic oppression. 2. The failure of Venetian justice. No legal recourse. As a Jew, Shylock has no legal protection against Antonio's abuse. The Duke and courts ignore his suffering. The bond is his only power. The contract is the one tool Shylock has to force Antonio, and by extension, Venice, to acknowledge his humanity. The villainy you teach me I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction. If the law won't protect him, he will weaponize it. 3. Jessica's betrayal intensifies his rage. His daughter abandons him. Jessica steals his wealth, converts to Christianity, and trades his dead wife's ring for a monkey. Christian hypocrisy. While Antonio's friends mock Shylock for valuing money, they celebrate Jessica's theft of it. His revenge on Antonio becomes symbolic, a strike against all who've wronged him. 4. The play's own logic supports him. Portia's hypocrisy. She preaches mercy but denies Shylock any, forcing his conversion and seizing his wealth. Antonio's friendship is violent too. Antonio risks death for Bassanio, a form of self-destructive loyalty that parallels Shylock's vengeful absolutism. If Antonio's extreme love is noble, why is Shylock's extreme hate not equally valid? 5. Historical context. Jews as scapegoats. Shylock is a product of his oppression. In 16th century Europe, Jews were banned from most professions, forced into moneylending, and then hated for it. His demand for flesh mirrors Christian blood libels, accusations that Jews murdered Christians for rituals. Shakespeare reverses the trope, making the Christian the victim of Jewish violence, but Shylock's rage is rooted in real persecution. His revenge is the inevitable result of centuries of bigotry. Conclusion. Is Shylock justified? Morally, yes. His demand is proportionate to his suffering. Legally, yes. Venice upholds contracts, and he holds Antonio to the letter of the law. Dramatically, absolutely. Shylock's vengeance forces the audience to confront Christian hypocrisy and the cost of hatred. Final verdict. Shylock's revenge is not just evil, it's the predictable explosion of a man pushed too far. The true horror isn't his knife, but the society that drove him to hold it. 10. From references in the play, quotes, allusions, etc., describe Venice as a setting and as a city for this play. Venice as a setting in The Merchant of Venice. Shakespeare's Venice is a lush, paradoxical world, a city of dazzling wealth and ruthless commerce, where beauty and cruelty coexist. Through dialogue, imagery, and historical allusion, the play paints Venice as 1. A city of merchants and money. Global trade hub. Antonio's wealth comes from argosies spanning the globe. References to wealthy Andrew and the Rialto highlight Venice's bustling markets. Money over morals. Bassanio describes Portia's Belmont as a golden fleece, comparing her to looted treasure. Shylock's bond is treated as a legal business deal, showing how finance trumps ethics. My ventures are not in one bottom trusted, nor to one place. 2. A place of racial and religious tension. Ghettoization of Jews. Shylock is called the Jew and lives in the Jewish quarter, reflecting Venice's 1516 ghetto. Christians mock him with slurs and spit on him. Hypocrisy of tolerance. Venice prides itself on law, but its justice is biased. The Duke pities Antonio but never intervened against Shylock's abuse. Hath not a Jew eyes? If you prick us, do we not bleed? 3. A stage for disguise and deception. Masquerade culture. Venice's carnival mirrors the role-playing in the plot. Portia and Nerissa disguise as men. Jessica escapes Shylock's house dressed as a page. Even the casket test is a kind of theatrical game. Appearance versus reality. Gold-silver caskets are deceptive. The lead casket holds truth. Shylock's merry bond hides lethal intent. The world is still deceived with ornament. 4. Contrast with Belmont. Venice's dark mirror. Venice equals commerce and conflict. Belmont equals love and music. Venice scenes are dominated by contracts, courtrooms, and cruelty. Belmont is a fairy-tale world of riddles, moonlight, and weddings. Yet Portia's wealth stems from Venice's trade. Jessica's flight. Her theft of Shylock's ducats ties Belmont's romance to Venice's greed. In Belmont is a lady richly left, and she is fair, and fairer than that word. 5. A lawful but unjust society. Venice's legalism. The trial scene shows Venice prizing contracts over mercy. Portia's quality of mercy speech is ironic. the law still destroys Shylock. Mob mentality, Salarino and Salanio mock Shylock's losses, showing communal cruelty. A pound of that same merchant's flesh is thine. The court awards it, and the law doth give it. Conclusion. Venice as a character. Shakespeare's Venice is not just a backdrop, it's a living, breathing antagonist. Its glittering canals mask corruption, its laws enable oppression, and its people perform virtue while practicing prejudice. By setting the play here, Shakespeare forces us to ask: is Venice a model of civilization, or a warning? Can justice exist in a city built on greed? The answer, like Shylock's fate, is brutally ambiguous. In The Merchant of Venice, Venice is not merely a backdrop for the action but a symbolically rich setting that shapes the themes and character dynamics. Shakespeare uses the city's reputation as a thriving commercial hub, known for its legal and social complexities, to highlight key themes such as commerce, justice, mercy, and social tensions. Through references, allusions, and the behavior of the characters, Venice emerges as both a pragmatic and morally ambiguous setting, one that reflects the interplay between materialism and human emotion. 1. Venice as a city of commerce and materialism. Venice, in the play, is a bustling economic center, where trade, wealth, and commerce dominate much of daily life. This is evident from the very beginning, when Antonio, a merchant, is described as wealthy, yet melancholic. The city's mercantile nature is crucial to the plot, as many of the characters, including Antonio, Bassanio, and Shylock, are involved in the world of trade. In Act 1, Scene 1, Antonio, though financially successful, is troubled, and this is partly due to the unsatisfying nature of wealth. He has plenty of money, but it doesn't bring him happiness. This sets the tone for Venice as a place where materialism and wealth are central, but emotional fulfillment is elusive. My ventures are not in one bottom trusted, nor to one place, nor is my whole estate upon the fortune of this present year. This line speaks to Antonio's constant engagement with the risks and rewards of commerce, as well as the fact that wealth alone does not bring contentment. Shylock, the moneylender, embodies Venice's harsh economic realities. His business of usury is both essential to the economy of the city and a source of deep resentment from the Christian population, especially Antonio. Shylock's role reflects the moral and ethical contradictions of Venice, a place where wealth and business are central, but where profit-making is viewed with suspicion and disdain if it is associated with greed or exploitation. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? Shylock's famous speech is part of his effort to humanize himself in a society that dehumanizes him because of his profession and religion. It shows the tension between commerce and human connection in Venice. 2. Venice as a legal and judicial hub. Venice is also portrayed as a city with a complex and rigid legal system, where contracts and laws are taken very seriously. This is highlighted in the bond between Shylock and Antonio, where the law and legal procedures play a central role in the plot. The courtroom scene in Act 4 takes place in the heart of Venetian law, showcasing Venice as a place where justice is formalized and bound by contract, yet also where mercy and grace can become tangled with the strict application of the law. In Act 4, Scene 1, the courtroom drama revolves around whether Shylock will receive his pound of flesh from Antonio. The city's reliance on legal contracts and binding agreements is shown in the ceremonious nature of the proceedings. The pound of flesh, which I demand of him, is dearly bought. 'Tis mine and I will have it. This starkly reflects Venice's strict approach to the letter of the law, but it also presents the moral dilemma of whether justice should take precedence over mercy. Venice here stands as a jurisprudential city, where law and money intermingle and often take precedence over humanity. 3. Venice as a city of social and religious tension. Venice is also a place where social and religious tensions are heightened, especially between the Jews and the Christians. This religious divide is integral to the play's exploration of themes such as revenge, justice, and compassion. Shylock's bitterness toward Antonio is partly because Antonio's Christianity places him at odds with Shylock's Jewish identity, further emphasizing Venice as a site of religious and cultural conflict. Throughout the play, there are many references to the animosity between Jews and Christians. Antonio's treatment of Shylock as less than human, through insults and acts of public humiliation, reflects the social and religious biases that permeate Venetian society. For Shylock, The bond represents an opportunity not only for financial gain but also for revenge against the Christian society that has wronged him. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies. This speaks to the alienation and rejection Shylock faces in Venice, a city where commerce and religion collide, and where social exclusion can be compounded by economic failure. 4. Venice as a place of appearance versus reality. Venice is also depicted as a city where appearances are often at odds with reality. The notion of disguise and deception runs throughout the play, especially with Portia's disguise as a lawyer in the courtroom. Venice, therefore, represents a society where outward appearances, be they in terms of legal contracts, social roles, or personal identities, are manipulated to serve personal interests. In Act 3, Scene 2, Bassanio chooses the lead casket, a test of his character rather than wealth or appearance, demonstrating the tension between outward shows of wealth and inner qualities. Venice, with its focus on commerce and appearances, serves as a backdrop where superficial judgments often obscure deeper truths. Conclusion: Venice as a microcosm of human nature overall. Venice in The Merchant of Venice serves as a microcosm of human society, where commerce, law, religion, and social relations collide. The city's materialistic foundation creates a space for both moral dilemmas and human suffering, while its legal system reflects a society that values contracts over compassion. The tensions between Christianity and Judaism, justice and mercy, and appearance and reality create a complex and often contradictory environment. Venice's portrayal as a city of both opportunity and oppression allows Shakespeare to explore universal human struggles, making the city an essential element of the play's thematic depth.